The village of Little Hemsby was a picture of tranquil charm. Its cobbled streets wound lazily past neat hedgerows, flower-laden cottages, and the white steeple of the parish church that seemed to gleam under the soft November sun. Smoke curled gently from chimneys, hinting at the warm hearths within, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. It was a typical late autumn afternoon when Miss Jane Marple arrived at Fairwood Hall, the stately yet comfortably lived-in manor house of her old friend Lady Beatrice Pembroke. Miss Marple, with her neatly pinned silver hair and a calm, shrewd eye, was a small figure yet possessed a quiet presence that seemed to notice everything. She had come for a weekend's visit, ostensibly for company, but she knew that even the quietest village harbored secrets that sometimes erupted in the most surprising of ways. Lady Beatrice met her at the door, her tall, elegant frame encased in a tweed coat, a gentle smile softening the lines of age. "Jane, my dear, come in, come in. It's been too long." Her voice, lilting and warm, carried a faint tremor, which Miss Marple noted with habitual attention. The drawing-room was prepared for afternoon tea. A polished oak table bore a crisp white cloth, silver teapots gleaming beside delicate china cups, and an array of pastries arranged with careful symmetry. Outside, the gardens lay muted beneath a blanket of fallen leaves, though the bright chrysanthemums near the windows gave a cheerful touch. It was a picture of domestic tranquillity, almost serene enough to lull one into carelessness. Other guests were beginning to arrive. First was Charles Pembroke, Lady Beatrice's nephew, tall and impeccably dressed, yet his manner held a subtle strain. Recent rumors of financial difficulty had preceded him, though he wore his usual confident smile. He greeted Miss Marple with a polite nod, though she could detect a flicker of unease behind the practised ease. Then came Clara Hawthorne, a visiting socialite whose sharp eyes and crisp voice were always at the ready. She greeted Lady Beatrice with warmth, yet her glance swept the room in a subtle survey of advantage, a habit Miss Marple had seen in many who prized social climbing over sentiment. Finally, Reverend Simon Ellison, the village vicar, arrived. A mild, mannered man, slightly nervous of social gatherings, but diligent in duty, he carried himself with the careful poise of one who wished neither to offend nor to be overlooked. The servants moved silently, attending to last-minute details. Mrs. Edith Langley, the housekeeper, oversaw everything with a meticulous eye. Her loyalty to the household was evident, yet Miss Marple's trained gaze noted the faint tension beneath her composed exterior. Tea began quietly, with polite conversation, weather, recent parish events, and the latest village gossip. Lady Beatrice poured the tea herself, insisting on civility and grace. Yet, as Miss Marple observed, subtle currents of tension flowed beneath the polite smiles. Charles, impatient, occasionally drummed his fingers against the table. Clara's eyes darted toward Lady Beatrice, as though weighing the older woman's vulnerabilities. Even Reverend Ellison's tone faltered slightly when the conversation turned toward the estate's finances, a topic most villagers handled with care. The inciting incident came swiftly and without warning. As Lady Beatrice reached for a biscuit from the silver tray, Clara suddenly gasped, her face paling. She slumped forward, clutching her throat, eyes wide in alarm. A cup of tea trembled in her hand before it overturned, spilling onto the tablecloth. Miss Marple, seated nearest, rose quietly, examining Clara's posture and expression. No convulsions, no prior complaint, yet the sudden collapse suggested more than mere faintness. Lady Beatrice cried out, and Charles rushed forward, his face clouded with alarm. The vicar knelt beside the prone woman, his voice trembling as he asked her to speak. Clara's lips moved faintly, forming words lost in the moment's chaos. The house fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. Miss Marple, however, observed quietly, noting the slight tremor in Lady Beatrice's hand as she gripped the teacup, the smudge of tea along the edge of the silver tray, and a subtle scent that lingered, bitter almonds. Her mind, ever analytical, whispered the words she rarely spoke aloud, cyanide. The afternoon's tranquillity had shattered, and Miss Marple, with her gentle, penetrating insight, already suspected that what appeared an accident might indeed be murder. The servants, flustered and anxious, cleared the immediate mess. Clara, thankfully revived after the vicar administered a small restorative tincture, sat trembling in the armchair, her composure fragile but returning. Lady Beatrice fussed over her, yet Miss Marple observed how her concern was tinged with distraction, a hint that she feared more than Clara's health. She feared exposure or scandal. Charles remained beside the fireplace, fidgeting, his jaw tight. "It must have been something she ate," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple noted the phrasing. It implied deflection. She made a mental note of his proximity to the tray before the incident. Reverend Ellison, helpful yet perturbed, revealed minor inconsistencies. I only left the room for a moment to answer the door," he said. "She was perfectly well when I returned." Miss Marple, recalling the placement of sugar bowls and biscuits moments earlier, suspected otherwise. Questions naturally arose, and Miss Marple began her delicate inquiry. She moved quietly, unobtrusively, examining the tea tray, the spoons, and the biscuits. A faint powder clung to the corner of a sugar caddy, barely noticeable but telling. "It seems, my dear," she murmured to herself, "that not all is as it appears. Mrs. Langley, protective of the household, insisted that nothing could have been amiss." Yet even she could not hide the subtle unease that flickered in her eyes when Miss Marple asked innocuous questions about the kitchen's preparations. Over tea, Miss Marple observed gestures and exchanged words, paying particular attention to the seemingly insignificant. Charles avoided Clara's gaze. Lady Beatrice adjusted her cuff obsessively. The vicar's hands twitched, and Mrs. Langley's movements, too smooth, betrayed a careful concealment. Later, in private reflection, Miss Marple considered the possibilities. Poison, accidental overdose, or deliberate deception. She leaned back in her chair, her knitting untouched. Who would gain by harming Clara Hawthorne, and how? Village life often seemed quaint and predictable, yet human ambition, jealousy, and fear often lay quietly beneath, waiting for a moment such as this. Her mind wandered to past lessons, cases from other villages she had observed in quiet retrospection. A sudden slip, a hidden message, an overlooked servant, details that often revealed more than the grand gestures of wealth and influence. And Little Hemsby, Miss Marple noted, was a village where secrets were as natural as autumn leaves falling to the ground. Days passed in a haze of polite anxiety. Inspector Graham, summoned from the county town, arrived to investigate formally. He was a thorough man, methodical and courteous, but Miss Marple noted that his methodical eye often missed subtleties that she, through years of observation, immediately detected. Clues began to emerge. One afternoon, Miss Marple discovered a small biscuit with a faint powder resid, tucked behind a teacup on the tray, carefully hidden to be accidental. She also came across Clara's private letters, revealing an intricate web of financial leverage, a secret that could embarrass or ruin certain guests if made public. Attention shifted toward Charles. Rumors circulated that he was courting a local heiress in secret, a maneuver that could secure the family estate and relieve him of debts. Motive was everywhere, yet nothing fit perfectly. Reverend Ellison's nervousness suggested he knew more than he admitted. Lady Beatrice's preoccupation hinted at secrets of the manor itself. Even Mrs. Langley's meticulous control of the kitchen seemed increasingly suspicious. A second incident occurred, a minor fire in the kitchen, fortunately extinguished before damage spread, but causing a momentary distraction that delayed the official investigation. Miss Marple, however, was pleased. Disruptions often revealed character. She noticed how Mrs. Langley's hands shook, not from fear of the fire, but from an earlier tension, a reveal of agitation she had tried to mask. Suspicion swirled. The inspector focused on Charles and Clara's acquaintances from London. Yet Miss Marple, through careful observation, remained unconvinced. She pondered the subtle details: who had poured the tea, who had moved the sugar bowl, whose fingerprints were most evident on the teacups, and whose absence at crucial moments went unaccounted for. Red herrings abounded. Letters, misplaced keys, and conflicting alibis painted a confusing tableau. Yet Miss Marple's mind, ever patient, sifted through these threads, recognizing patterns invisible to those who relied solely on appearances. Miss Marple invited all parties to the drawing-room one crisp evening. She requested, ever politely, that each recount their recollection of the tea incident, framing it as an exercise in courtesy rather than interrogation. The guests, slightly nervous, obliged. Piece by piece, she reconstructed the scene. Small observations, the faint smell of almonds on the silver tray, the precise timing of Clara's collapse, the subtle repositioning of the biscuits, coalesced into clarity. She recalled a story from her youth, a long-serving housekeeper in a distant village who concealed a deadly grievance behind devotion and propriety. Her intuition, sharpened by years of patient scrutiny, guided her to the truth. One by one, she teased out contradictions in statements, minor hesitations, and overlooked gestures. Then she turned her calm gaze to Mrs. Langley. "Edith," she said gently, "your devotion to the household is admirable, yet it seems that devotion has taken a rather protective form. You were concerned that certain actions of Miss Hawthorne might expose matters best kept private, were you not, Mrs.?" Langley's composure faltered, her eyes widening. She attempted denial, but Miss Marple's precise questioning, coupled with her recollection of small, telling details, the sugar caddy, the biscuit placement, and the quiet tension in her movements, left little room for evasion. At last the truth emerged. Mrs. Edith Langley, long loyal but deeply envious of Clara's ease and wary of her possible exposure of financial irregularities, had poisoned the biscuit. The method was subtle, the intent carefully hidden, designed to appear as a feint or accidental mishap. The motive, though not cruelly personal, was driven by fear and jealousy, emotions as common in villages as the autumn wind. The inspector, though initially skeptical, accepted Miss Marple's reasoning. The evidence corroborated her insights. Charles and Clara, though shaken, were unharmed, and Lady Beatrice expressed relief tinged with astonishment. The village of Little Hemsby, momentarily unsettled, returned to its familiar rhythm. Tea resumed with careful attention, though Miss Marple quietly noted the absence of the previously placed sugar spoon. As she packed her bag to leave Fairwood Hall, Miss Marple reflected on the nature of human behaviour. Even in serene villages, beneath the polite smiles and fragrant teas, ambition, jealousy, and fear whispered quietly. Yet patience, observation, and gentle reasoning often revealed what others overlooked. And as she stepped into the crisp late afternoon, she smiled to herself, knitting needles in hand, thinking, even over afternoon tea, a murder can unfold, but so can its resolution, with a little attention to the small, telling details,